To all the software developers out there, if I asked you in what language you program in, I could probably guess the right answer. And that answer would be English. For better or for worse, English has become the lingua franca of the computing world since Charles Babbage. But there are a few systems out there that allow you to program in languages other than English. And today, we'll look at one of those. WinDev 2025 from French software maker PCsoft. First of all, what is WinDev? First released in 1993, it's an integrative development environment for business applications. It can be used to make Windows, Linux, Java, web, iOS, Android applications, pretty much all modern platforms. As its principal language, it uses W langage or W language, which is a language that should be very familiar to those who have used modern languages. It has an easy-to-read language-like syntax, such as this example, which is looping over a group of employees. It's probably the only programming language in the world that has grammatical gender. As you can see, chaîne is feminine and entier is masculine. And it has all the features of any modern programming language, such as classes, but also an incredibly deep library of functions, such as validating national identity numbers, calculating when Easter is for a given year, or even converting a number to its written out form in Chinese financial characters. And now it's time for the unboxing, because this software, yes, comes in a shrink-wrapped box. In the spirit of French luxury goods, this software harkens back to the heyday of software when it came in a beautifully designed box, not just downloaded for 99 cents from some anonymous app store. Even though it's brand new, it's packaged like a vintage 1993 masterpiece. I'm not even sure the last time I opened up a nice shrink-wrap box of software that was brand new, but here we go. And this box is huge. Let's open up the lid and see all the goodies that they've stuffed inside. Yes, we've got stickers and pens and branded notepads and a whole fleet of documentation, including a manual discussing the concepts of getting started with WinDev 2025, reference manual for W language functions, a nicely laminated list of keyboard shortcuts, and a sample copy of their trimestral magazine, beautifully designed and with some interesting articles. And there's even swag in the box. They included sunglasses and a nicely branded t-shirt. Ironically, we still have to download the actual application, but let's do that and let's get started. So let's start with the classic example of Hello World. Here is WinDev 2025 running. I'm going to select the new icon in the upper left and click Projet, New Project. I'm going to select Application Windows ou Linux. Then I'm going to click Suivant, Next down below. This is where we select the style of the application. Since it's a console app, we're just going to click Suivant again. And now let's name the project. Since everything else is in French, let's translate Hello World to Bonjour le Monde. Terminé. Now this is the window that pops up to allow you to create new things when you create a new project. I'm going to skip that for right now. I'm going to right-click on Configuration, Configurations, and then Description. We're going to change this to be a console application. That we see near the bottom, there's a radio button to change this to be a console application. So I'm going to select that radio button. And I'm going to click OK. Now I'm going to create the actual code to say Hello World. So I'm going to right-click on Procedures in the Explorateur de Projet, the Project Explorer. I'm going to click Nouveau, New. And it gives me Procédure Globale as a default, so I'm going to accept that. And now I'm going to type in the W language method that allows me to write to the console, which is console écrit. And I'm going to write Bonjour le Monde. Let's try running this by clicking the Go up in the upper left here. And we see very quickly, we saw the message, but since it terminates the application upon completion, we probably need to add some sort of thing where we read the console. So I'm going to use console lit pour lire, to read the data of the console. So let's try running this again. And this time we see Bonjour le monde. So we made a sample Hello World application. Let's try something a little more exciting. Let's actually create a real project. So I'm going to go back here, click on the new icon in the upper left and click Projet again. I'm going to select Application Windows or Linux again. This time it actually matters the choice since we're actually going to have a visual interface, but I'll select the first choice. I don't really care that much about which actual choice I make here. And we're going to make a project that uses the classic Northwind database. So I'm going to call this Vent du Nord. Why not translate that literally into French? And I'm going to click Terminer. First thing we want to do here is we want to use the Données option because we're going to create an analysis of the existing Northwind database. So I'm going to click the fifth option there, Analyse. This is where we create that analysis of the data. I'm going to click Suivant, accept the choices by default. Now my Northwind database is running in Postgres currently. So I'm going to scroll down and find the Postgres adapter. Now I'm going to type in the connection settings for my Postgres database. And I'll rename this connection for a better name than just simply ma connexion. Call that Northwind. Click on Suivant next, and then Terminer. So we've created our analysis file. I'm going to then click on Nouveau Fichier in the toolbar, New File at the top, where we're going to click on Utiliser des fichiers de données d'une base existante. So I'm going to use a data file from an existing database and click Suivant. I'm going to select the same connection I had before, Postgres, and we use the same connection. Then I'm going to click Accéder directement aux données, or directly access data in their format. So let me select a few of the tables that are interesting in the Northwind database. I'm going to select order details. I'm going to select orders as well, and I'm going to select products as well. Click on Suivant, next again, and Terminer. Now we see the three database tables I've imported from my Northwind database. You can move them around, and we see that the relationships have been imported as well. Put this on top where you can see that a little better. Now that we have this data, let's make a window where we can actually see some actual data. I'm going to click the new icon in the upper left again and click Fenêtre to make a new window. I'm going to select the option Vierge for an empty window. Then I'm going to click OK. This opens up a dialog box, so I'm going to type in the name of the window. Let's call it Table Commande or Orders Table. I'm going to click OK. And there is my empty window. Now I'm going to click on the Explorateur de Projet, and I'm going to select the orders table that we created from in the Analyse, and I'm simply going to drag and drop it. And it offers me to create a table field, création d'une champ table, creation of a table field, and I'm going to select the columns that I would like in this table. I'm going to deselect pretty much everything that I don't really care too much about here. I'm going to select Terminer, and this generates the table that I can move around and adjust its appearance. So I'm going to make this table a little bigger, make it fill the whole window. I'm going to skip ahead where I rename some of the columns just to make it look a little prettier. So now we need to go into the three columns and change how the data is displayed. So I'm going to go into the first column here, select that on the top there where I select Order ID. I'm going to go to the tab Général, and I'm going to change this input mask so I can actually put in more than 4 numbers. So I'm going to select 8 there. As you saw, they were getting cut off since there was more than 4 numbers there. So I'm going to go click Go in the upper left again and select that window as being my première fenêtre, first window. So here we are. Now we have the data from the Northwind database being populated into a table, and I can scroll down and see all of the orders that are in that orders table. So now let's add a new window where we can actually see kind of the details of each order. So I'm going to click the new icon again, and I'm going to click Fenêtre again. Create the exact same type of window that I created before. This time I'm going to name this fiche command, or like order form, and click OK. Let's change the title of this window just to make this look a little prettier. Let's just call this command order. Click OK. Now I'm going to click under my Explorateur de Projet, my Project Explorer. I'm going to click under that orders table that I imported. I'm literally just going to drag and drop some fields on here. So let me drag in order ID. Move that around a little bit. Make that a little wider. I'm going to go back in the description. I'm going to do the same thing that I did for the table under the input mask. I'm going to add a little more numbers there for they don't get cut off, since there are more than 4 digits that I'm visualizing there. Then let me repeat the same process with some other fields from my orders table. Let me speed this up a little bit. So let me resize the window for its more appropriate size for the number of fields we have. So I'm going to go back to the table window that we had, and I'm going to make a little space to add a button here. So I'm going to click under Bouton on the ribbon there. I'm going to drag on a button to my table window. Maybe put it on the left here. And I'm going to rename that Visualiser. Now we want that button to actually open our details window. So I'm going to right click on the button. I'm going to select the option code, which we can get to by F2 as well. So this is the event handler for when I click on the button. So I'm going to type in the name of the window that I made, Fenêtre fiche command. I'm going to go dot and type in the method ouvre, open, which should open a new instance of that window. So I'm going to go Control F9 to try this out, and here's the first window with the table. So I'm going to click on a row, and I'm going to click Visualiser, visualize, and the new window opens, but we have no data currently populating. So we need to do an extra step in order to enable the data binding between the database and the actual window. So let me close out of these windows, and I'm going to go back to the code for the detail window that we created. Let me right click somewhere on the window. Let me go back into code. Now in the initialization, at the end of the initialization, fin d'initialisation, I'm going to call the method fichier vers écran, file to window. This is going to apply the data binding between the current file and the current window. Let me run that again. Select a row, and I'm going to click the button on the top. And now we have the data from the database automatically bound to the fields. Now one thing nice is that instead of clicking the button, we could just double click one of the rows. So let me go back into the table window. So I'm going to right click on the window and open the description tab where we set the settings for each type of field. So I'm going to click on general. No, I think it's under the UI tab is where we select the button to enable. So I'm going to select on the bottom. You see it says double click. So I'm going to just simply select the button that I want to have happen when I double click a row on the table and click OK. So let me run the application again. Instead of clicking the button this time, I'm just going to double click a row and it opens a new window as we expected. So now let's pull in the actual list of order details. I'm going to do this in a different method. So I'm going to click New, and I'm going to click on Requête, where I can put in a SQL query that I want to run. So I'm going to select the Selection, select type of query. And this opens the Editeur de Requête, the query editor. So I'm going to open up the 3 tables that we made, and I'm just going to actually add in the rows that I'd like, which is all the ones from the order details table. Then I'm going to click on Condition de Sélection as we want to filter those with the appropriate order ID. So let me click on that and click on Nouvelle Condition, New Condition. So I'm going to find the order ID column that I want to filter on. Click the three dots and select the order ID column. And then I want to make that equal to a paramètre, a parameter. Let me just rename that, add a little underscore there. Click OK. Let me rename the requête. So I'm going to call this requête order details. I'm going to click OK, which will create our SQL query. Save that in the project. So let's use this query in the window to show the order details. Let me go back to that window. Let me make a little more space here where we can have spot to add in those lines of data. I'm going to go up to the ribbon. I'm going to select Zone répétée, repeated zone, vertical, vertical. I'm going to select Remplir la zone par programmation. I'm going to fill that in with actual code is what that meant. And I'm going to name this now, order details. Let's name that repeated zone. So now let me drag out various fields that I can have for the information that I want to show for each row in the order's details request. So let me add a combo box first. This is going to be where we select the actual product. I'm going to select the show this data from an actual database file, and I'm going to select the products table. So I want that to be our selection. Let me click product name as the field I want to show, and the data I want to use is product ID. That's the value that I want to be returned. I'm not going to do any data binding, so I'm going to leave this as no and click Suivant. And I'm going to leave all these other fields the same, and let's rename this product ID, as that's the actual value that this will be representing, and click Terminer. So let me just remove the label here since you don't need that repeated for each row, and make the actual field itself take all the space of the field. Make it a little shorter here as well. So let's now repeat this for the other columns we want to show. So let me add in another just text field here. So let me open up the description tab so we can change the name of that. And this is going to be our unit price. Let me name that. Let me remove the label since we don't need that as well. And let's put this as a monetary. So I think instead of being under the input mask, it's actually a different type of field. Yeah, here it is. Monetary. So this is going to be our money field. We can just leave that as the defaults and click OK. So this will now represent the unit price shown as a money value. Let me make that a little smaller. So let's add in a different field for the quantity this time. So I'm going to go in here. I'm going to rename this to be quantity. Remove the label again. And let me change that to be a numeric type. And click OK. So let me just resize this field. Make it a little shorter. There we go, it looks better. So let's add in a fourth field. This is going to be for our discount percentage. Let me just make that a little smaller. Go back into the tab window. We clicked on the wrong thing there. There we go. So now we're in the actual field. Let me rename this to be discount. Remove the label again. Now I want to make this a numeric type again. And this time we're going to go into the input mask section, and I'm going to make this a decimal with 1 digit after the decimal point. And I'm going to put in a % as the suffix. And you see it opens a little message here where it notes that if you have a % in the format, it will automatically convert that into a decimal percentage. So 100% will become 1. So there we go. We have our 4 fields. I'm going to make that just a little bit bigger. Take the space of that label. Make the actual space of the repeated zone a little shorter for we see more rows in each each window. Let me add some labels here as well on top. Let me speed this up. There we go. So now let's actually fill in the data. I'm going to do this by code, as I mentioned before. So I'm going to right-click. So after the initialization, at the end of initialization of our window, I'm going to run the command to execute this request. That is execute requête. There we go. And I'm going to pass in the request that I had made before. And I'm just going to use the normal mode for this, the default request mode, H requête défaut. And then I'm going to add in the parameter, the order ID, which is simply orders order ID. So it's interesting, you can get the actual current value from the orders object. So now let's do a loop of this. The automatic suggestion that the AI gives us is not exactly what we want. We might actually loop through this. So I'm going to do pour chaque, for each. Result in our requête order details. The request also represents the actual results itself. So let's go through each of these, and I'm going to use the function zone répétée ajoute ligne, repeated zone add line, to add information into my repeated zone. This requires actual reference to the repeated zone I made, which is ZR order details. Then let's populate the values that we want in each of these. So I'm going to put in the same 4 values that I had before. Let me speed this up. So we got product ID, unit price, quantity, and discount. So let me go back to the window. Now we need to set this up in the actual repeated zone, where we have actually 4 attributes that will be bound to those 4 fields. So at the top you see that there's an attribute section here. So I'm going to add in the 4. Let me speed this up. So for each of those 4 attributes, I'm simply selecting the appropriate field, and that's going to be bound automatically to value, one-way binding to value. So let me click OK, and a window pops up showing the impact of my changes, which I will accept. So now let's try this out, see if this works. Control F9 to run the project again. Open up one of these orders, and we see that we now have data being shown in this section. Let's try another one. Scroll down a little bit. Pick another one at random. And indeed we do. We have the order details being populated via that SQL query that we set up, being pushed into the repeated zone, the attributes being bound to each field, and it's working as expected. Now, one thing we're missing is sort of like a total of the order, which should be very useful. So let's add in a label here. Let me add a little space here below the repeated zone. Drag out a label from the volet de création. No, that's a text field. We want a label instead. So libellé. Make that a little bigger. Open up the description tab again. Let's name this to be a total. And then in the type, we want this to be monetary again, money units. And click OK. And we're adding a little label here that says that this is the total. So now we need to actually write some code to calculate that total. So I'm going to go into this window in the Project Explorer. And under Procedures, I'm going to right-click. I'm going to click Nouvelle Procédure, New Procedure. Let me name this Recalculate, how about? Since that's what we're going to be recalculating the total. So let's declare a variable, soit, as in let, total est un numérique, is a number. And now let's loop through each of the items. So I'm going to do pour toute ligne, for every line, the zone répétée order details, every line of the order details. Total is going to be plus equals, as in increment that. the attribute, or rather I should put the field quantity, for I can change it since the attribute won't change automatically, multiplied by the value of the field unit price times 1 minus that percent discount field. Order details dot saisie discount. Okay, so now let's fill in that label that I made, the libellé total price. The total price label is going to be equal to that total field. So I probably need to call this each time one of these fields changes. But I'm actually going to use a new feature of WinDev 2025, and that's reactive procedures. So I'm going to add a keyword here after procédure. I'm going to add réactive, which is going to tell WinDev that whenever one of the reference dependencies change, this procedure will actually be automatically rerun. And you notice that there are these blue lines that appear under the dependencies. So let me go back to the code of the window, and I'm going to call this method in the fin d'initialisation, the end of the initialization of that window. I'm going to call recalculate, and we see the icon appears to denote that is a reactive procedure. So let me run the application, open one of the windows, and we see we now have the total price being shown in the window. Now, if I try to change the price, it should update. So if I change this, and it does not, so I think we have a little bug in the code. So let's jump back to the code. Let me open up that procedure again, recalculate procedure that I made via the Project Explorer on the left. And that if we look up, I used attribute instead of the saisie, the field itself. So instead of ATT, I should put SAI. So let's save this and let's rerun the application again. So if I open a random order and I change one of the prices of the item this time, since the field changes with my input, so if I change that to be $700, for instance, and I change the quantity as well, the total price is automatically updated with the reactive procedure. So one additional refinement we could make is that when I select one of the products from the drop-down list, it actually doesn't update the price, even though there is a price defined in the products table. So let's close this out, and we're going to add some code for when the product is changed on the drop-down box. We're going to actually get a new price for that. So I'm going to right-click on here. I'm going to open the code window for this. And that we see there is an option for sélection d'une ligne de combo, line selection for that combo box. So I'm going to use a different method this time in order to directly execute a SQL query. First step, I'm going to initialize a variable. Requête prix est une source de données. So request price is going to be a data source, and that's automatically going to be tied to that data analysis that I did. So I'm going to have all the tables and such available to me. I'm going to use the function execute requête SQL, and I'm going to supply that data source as the first parameter, so requête prix. The second parameter is optional, so I'm going to skip that, and I'm just going to start typing my SQL request in under quotes here. So I'm going to do select unit price from products where product ID equals some value. And I'm going to use a parameter, so that's why the curly braces with the name of my parameter. To provide the parameter value, I need to use requête prix, and one of the properties will be the name of that parameter. And let me set that to be moi-même, which is the same as self in other languages. And I'm going to select valeur, as that is my current value of that combo box. Now I want to read the first value of my request. So let me go requête prix lit première, read first. Now we see that the AI proposed something here, which looks relatively correct. It's checking to see if I have a value that I received back, and if so, I'm going to set that to be the attribute. So let me accept that suggestion by pressing Tab. But instead of setting the attribute, which is not exactly what we want to set since we don't dynamically change that, so let me change that to be the saisie unit price, the unit price field. So now let's run this and give this a try. Let me open up a random order on our list. Let me try changing the product to a new product. And we see that the price is automatically populated based on the defined unit price in the product table. So WinDev also includes an entire reporting system. So I'm going to go back to the new button on the top left, and I'm going to go État. I'm going to make a new report here. I'm going to select État Vierge for an empty report. This is going to open up the report editor. Let's save this as, let's call it État Command. So my order report. I'm going to right click and I'm going to go into the now famous tabbed editor where I modify all the properties of elements. And I'm going to change where the data is coming from. So this is going to be coming from an integrated request, sort of a bespoke request that only this is going to be using. So I'm going to add in all the columns from the orders table, from the orders details table, basically get all the columns from the 3 tables that I imported. And we actually do the joins automatically. So now I want to go into Rubrique Calculer. I want to make a calculated field for the actual subtotal for each item, which will be exactly as we saw earlier, the unit price multiplied by the quantity, multiplied again times 1 minus that discount percentage. Let me change the name of this Rubrique Calculer, this calculated field. Let me call this subtotal. Let me click OK. So now we have the data that we want defined. Now we need to filter that based on the appropriate order. So I'm going to click on Condition de Sélection, as we did earlier in the request we made, and select one of the order ID columns. Probably doesn't really matter which one. Probably would have been better order, but order details works as well. And we're going to make that est égal à is equal to a parameter. Name that parameter and click OK. So let's leave this request editor. And now that we see our data is coming from that requête intégrée, that integrated request. So now I'm going to go back into the actual report editor. And similar to how we did on Windows, I'm just going to drag out some various controls and build the report. I think I'll speed this up since it's not the most exciting part to watch someone build a report, as it's very similar to other report editors in other systems. So after renaming that label, I'm going to go into the liaison, the linked tab. I'm going to select the field that I actually want to display in that label. So this is actually the product name. So I'm going to find product name, click OK. So I'm going to repeat that for the 3 other fields in super high speed here. Now let's test the report. I'm going to click Report Visualizer to actually just see a preview of the report. And it gives me the parameter to fill in. So I'll fill in a number I saw earlier for an order ID. And it says I already have something running, so I'll just quit that. And then we see the report that I made with the data filled in. So why don't I add like the address? Let me quickly speed that up. Just putting labels in with the actual address in. So let's run this again, and we should see now the shipping address being displayed on the report. So let me go back to the report editor, and maybe we can add in the order ID for that's actually visible on the actual report. So let me close the preview window. Go back here to the title of the report. Why don't we change that to say command order. Let's make that a little smaller, and then we can add in another label. And this one will bind it to the order ID, so it's actually visible.
adjust the size. Adjust the size a little bit. There we go. So now let's run the report. See what it looks like. It's showing that order ID is now being displayed on the report. Let's close that. Let's now add like a barcode. We're going to have the actual like order ID encoded in a barcode. So I'm going to drag in the barcode from the ribbon. Go back into the description panel where I can change everything. Let's change it to code 39. And these can be bound to any data element just like any other field. So I'm going to select order ID. Adjust the height of this start section of the document a little bit. Let's try that again in the preview. And we see now we have a report with our barcode. Let me zoom in a little bit so we can see a little better. And we see all the information from our orders in a nicely printed fashion, formatted for printing. So now that we have a report, let's go back to the details window. And we're going to add a button in order to display that printed order report. So we'll drag a button on here. Let me change the name of this and we'll put imprimer, print. So I may right click on that, open up the code window to add an event handler for the click action for that button. So I'm going to use the command iDestination or iDestination, and I'm going to put it in where I want to actually print this. I want to use that preview panel. So I'm going to put in iVisualizator, iPreview. I'm going to set up the request. So I'm going to say état command, and I'm going to go init requête and put in the parameter, which should be orders order ID, similar to before. Now instead of using that syntax, I could have used init requête ita as well, which should be the same thing, but I just need to pass in the ita as the first argument. Now let's print that. So I'm going to call the imprime command on ita command, or I could have done imprime ita as well. So let's test this application. Control F9. Let me select an order. And if I click that imprimer button, I should, in the preview panel, see my order neatly formatted as a report.
So that's an example of what you can make with WinDev 2025. It clearly is a bit of a throwback to an era of rapid application development tools, such as Fox Pro. Sadly, Microsoft abandoned Fox Pro years ago, but I still think there's a market for these sorts of tools that allow you to rapidly build line of business applications for enterprises. Hope that was interesting. Thanks for watching. And you can actually use WinDev in English. There is an English version.